Thanks for staying with us here on The Real Story. As we've said, there are just days left in this short legislative session, but still a lot to do. Hundreds of potential new laws still waiting to see if they can make it to the governor's desk. Joining us now, zooming in right from the session, is State Senator James Moroney, Deputy Majority Leader, serving on several committees and author and leader of this session's major artificial intelligence package. Senator, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we know it's a short session and you have one of the biggest bills this go around: artificial intelligence, embracing it, funding it, regulating it. This new technology is constantly evolving and frankly hasn't really been legislated yet on a lot of different levels. What's the process been like of learning the scope of what laws are needed here? Because I know you've been working with and talking to a lot of different people about this.
Yeah, it's been a long process. It actually started back with working on the state's consumer data privacy laws. And so I was fortunate enough to work on those. And in 2022, we passed a comprehensive data privacy bill for Connecticut residents. We were the 5th state in the country. But as part of that, we created a task force to actually look at automated decision-making and AI. And that was before ChatGPT had launched. And so in that following fall, we started looking at regulating AI. We had Professor Suresh Venkata Subramanian from Brown, who is one of the authors of the White House's blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights, present to our working group. And then we looked at regulating, and last year we actually passed laws to regulate state government use of AI.
Right.
And of course, in that time, ChatGPT launched, and now AI is on everyone's mind and thinking about it. And so in this past year, we ran another task force in Connecticut. We had experts from all over the country present to us. And also, I was fortunate enough to work with other legislators from around the country. We pulled together an unofficial working group with legislators from more than 30 states, over 100 different legislators from around the country, bipartisan, big states, small states. And we had a number of experts present to us. And we had people from the EU present. The EU has passed their AI Act, which will start going into effect and getting phased in over the next 2 years. This past weekend, just over a week ago now, or just about a week ago, I was at a conference where I met one of the authors of a Utah AI bill that actually went into law. Utah's AI legislation went into effect went into effect on May 1st. Which is just requiring disclosure so that you know if you're interacting with AI. So it's been a long process working with industry, academia, government, civil society, as well as my colleague, Senator Rodriguez from Colorado. And we've both put forward similar bills to attempt to start at putting some broad guardrails and safeguards on AI.
So a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different players there. You know, we know Connecticut has had some real concerns and problems with the power grid lately, a fear of how this technology adds to that overload. What are the conversations and potential solutions when it comes to that?
Yeah, and that, like, the critical infrastructure is something that is really being dealt with. That is one of the things that's being dealt with on the federal level. I know a lot of people, myself included, don't necessarily have a lot of faith for legislation to come out federally. The last federal internet legislation was passed in 1998, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. But you know, through President Biden's executive order, NIST is looking at, so the National Institute of Science and Technology of Standards and Technology is looking at creating some guidelines, working with the various agencies, and looking at those important protections for critical infrastructure.
And so here at the state level, this bill, again, has a lot of parts in it. And when it comes to passing a bill, particularly a large one in this last week of a short session, it's definitely not an easy feat. We know you've gotten great feedback, but also some pretty powerful pushback. You've made some major changes in the last few weeks. Talk to us what that process has been like.
Yeah, and it's a long process of engaging with stakeholders. And, you know, when we did it, when I worked on the consumer privacy bill, that took 3 years, and still working up to the end, taking feedback. And then last year we passed a children's data privacy bill, which actually is one of the only ones that was not challenged constitutionally and not there weren't lawsuits against us. So, and the same with that bill, the process was engaging stakeholders, running a working group. And I did the same this year with the AI bill with my colleagues. I wanted maximum transparency. And so I was publishing the amendments as I was working and getting feedback and red lines from various groups, whether it was civil society, Center for Democracy and Technology sent a lot of feedback, or from industry. And in the end, we got it to a point where, our first public hearing, there were people in industry saying that this would end industry as we know it. Well, paraphrasing a little and exaggerating, and then there were people from civil society saying this bill is worse than doing nothing. Unfortunately, not paraphrasing. That was an actual quote from someone. And so we felt we were on the right track, that we were fair. But, in the end, we were able to get support for our bill from, there are small businesses in Connecticut who are very excited about it. Adara, V2SIM have been very supportive. We also, again, despite initial opposition, we were able to get support from Microsoft and IBM, and then work with a lot of other big companies who were opposed, who, once they understood our goal, and our goal is really, we want to put in protections. We know that in the next 2 years, there's this Yard Matrix did a survey that says 75% of landlords are going to use AI for screening tenants in the next 2 years. Over 80% of companies are going to be using AI for screening resumes. And so we're looking at what we call high-risk AI and just making sure that before you use an algorithm to make an important decision about someone's life, you tested it. You want to make sure there's no disparate impact. It doesn't discriminate based on age or race or other characteristics, right? You know that it's safe. And that's really all we want to do. We're not saying not to use it. In fact, we want people to embrace AI. And a lot of the bill is about workforce development, creating an Connecticut online AI academy that'll have free training courses for everyone, as well as certificate programs, and working with nonprofits to help those people who aren't connected to the internet to get training, to get devices, and how to use AI. But so we're not saying not to use it, quite the opposite. We want people to use it responsibly and ethically.
Right. That's been, the biggest discussion here is how do you strike that balance between embracing it and also regulating it? There have been a lot of those challenges and a lot of those concerns, whether it's deep fakes and scams, like you said, making sure people are using this new technology ethically. What are some of the biggest regulations that you hope get through from this bill?
Well, right now, like you mentioned, some of those known knowns, those known risks that we've seen. And so there was in the New Hampshire primary, there was a fake call of President Biden that went out to people, and it said stay home. And so a lot of people are concerned with the elections this year. What if you use deep fakes for elections? Half of the world's population will vote in a Democratic election this year. And so that's one of the pieces of the bill. There is a companion piece of legislation in the House on the deep fakes for elections. And I really have to give Representative Matt Blumenthal a lot of credit for the great work he's been doing on the deep fakes for elections. But another of those known risks is, unfortunately, deep fakes for non-consensual intimate images or revenge porn, deep fake porn. Over 96% of deep fakes that are created are deep fake porn. And unfortunately, the victim is often young women and girls. And, I think everyone heard of it when it happened to Taylor Swift. But, last fall in New Jersey, there was a high school where they took girls' photos from the yearbook and then used the notification software and sent around compromising pictures of them. And think back, if I think back to when I was a teenager, I was easily embarrassed by anything. And I couldn't imagine the trauma, right? If someone had sent those types of pictures around, and think of, young women and young men and how vulnerable they are. And that's something we need to protect and to criminalize, sending those deep fakes, knowingly sending those deep fake non-consensual intimate images.
Right, definitely a need for those protections there. But, with just days to go now in the short session, we'll see what parts of this bill actually come law soon enough. But, already looking ahead to next session, there's a lot more to tackle when it comes to tech. If there's things that don't get through in this package, do you think are one or two aspects of AI or something you think might not get through that you want to see reprioritized when the chambers return in 2025?
Yeah, already looking at what we're going to do next year. We will have another task force. There'll be public meetings. There'll be spots on there for people who have expertise if they want to volunteer to help. One of the pieces that was in the bill initially that we ended up taking out because I thought we should take a little more time to more carefully define it was looking at the general purpose AI, so a larger model like a ChatGPT or a Gemini, and just putting in some broad disclosure requirements, mainly so that if you're using it in a high-risk situation. So we're looking at models that can be integrated and do different things, but that you disclose some of your training, summaries of your training, that would be how it was trained, and creating model cards and system cards so that if someone is going to integrate it into a high-risk service, they have the information they need to do an impact assessment. The other thing we want to look at is our data privacy laws.
Yep.
When we passed them, we created some exemptions. One of the exemptions is enabling for the sale of location data, that we don't think people should be able to sell your location data from your cars. And so without your permission, at least, if you give permission, yes, they can sell it, but we don't think that should be opt out, and that wasn't intended in the initial law. So we need to go back and look at that. And then just keeping an eye on other state laws. They've changed the definition of sensitive data. So there's other information we want to protect, and sensitive data gets the highest level of protections. And so, looking at proposed law in Vermont, Monique Priestley has been working on that and doing a fantastic job, but also bills that have passed in New Jersey, Oregon, Delaware, and Maryland. They've added additional things to the definition of sensitive data that we really need to add in, one of them being financial information. There was a major online tax company that was selling some of that data, and we don't think that should be opt out. We think you should have to give permission for that type of data to be sold about you.
Definitely a lot to keep track of, and we'll be watching this package in the last couple days of the session. State Senator Maroney, who I've heard been called the state Senate's AI expert. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for helping us break this down. We'll continue to watch it. That does it for us here now on The Real Story. But if you want to watch these segments again, you can head to fox61.com or download the free Fox 61 News app and watch The Real Story every Sunday at 10 a.m. right here on Fox 61 or streaming on Fox 61 Plus. Have a great morning.